Hey again, everyone. Tony Winston here. Thanks for tuning in. This video is going to be in two parts. It's going to be first about that particular song, Sweet Georgia Brown, and then I'm going to do a little bit on the B-flat blues. And basically, I'm going to be talking about the mixolydian scale because I've had some questions recently about this and how to improvise using it. And if it wasn't for these questions and comments, I would not even be here making a video today. So thank you for those. And in addition to the mixolydian scale, I'm going to kind of show you a way to make it sound even jazzier by adding some passing tones and doing what they call the bebop scale, or one of the bebop scales. All right, first let's just talk about terminology here. The first chord here, it's, we're in the key of A flat, so the first chord is built on the 6th degree of the scale. But people will still, because it's a dominant 7th chord, people still will call this a 5 chord, all right? The real 5 chord is E flat, but anytime you have a dominant chord, you can call it a 5 chord just because it's a dominant 7th chord. So the terms are kind of interchangeable. If you want to be very rigorous about it, then there's only one 5 chord, that's the E flat 7th. All right, here's a dominant 7th, and you just take the major scale, F major, and flat the 7. Right? Now, flatting the 7 doesn't mean it's a black key, because in G, for instance, there's the flat 7, right? G major scale has got a F sharp in it, and when you flat that, it comes out as F natural. But anyway, back to F7. Here's the mixolydian scale. And then we're going to do the same thing for B flat 7th. E flat 7th. All right, there. And then when we get to A flat, this is not a dominant 7th chord. It's just A flat major 6th chord maybe. Just use the major scale. All right, so let's improvise a little bit using just mixolydian mode on each of the 3 dominant 7th chords that start this piece. F7 first. Now, that sounds kind of like a beginning improvisation, doesn't it? Let me show you something that you can do that will enhance your mixolydian scale a little bit. And that is putting in a passing tone. And there's a couple places you could do this, but let's put it right here between the root and the flat 7th. So watch what happens. All right, that kind of went off the rails there a little bit, but anyway, you get the idea. So you can go down, you can go up. Going down seems to be a little more convincing, but you can do it that way. And you can tell I've still got the song in my head. I'm kind of playing the same rhythm as the melody, so I can get a little bit farther away from that. Okay, there was something halfway decent. Now, there's other places you can add that passing tone. You could put it between the 2nd degree and the root, like this. Like that, so let me do it again. Now on E flat, it's going to be right here. And, by the way, on the little passing chords there that gets you back to the beginning of the next section of the song, which is very similar, it's good to outline the chords. Like if you did something like on A flat and then G, like that. Because the chords go by pretty quickly, and outlining the chords, helps keep the listeners understanding what's going on. Like, for instance, if I played diminished scale on all those chords or something, it gets a little iffy there about what you're actually doing. Okay, so now we looked at two different places where we could put that passing tone in. What if we did it in both places? Yeah, you could there and here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So, and you could probably add some other places too, like the regular bebop scale on a major chord, usually puts the extra note between the 5th and the 6th. So you could probably do that on a dominant chord as well. And what's the advantage of putting this extra note in? Well, the diminished scale has 8 notes to it. And for some reason, it always just seems to work out pretty well. And so when you have 8 notes in your scale, your lines just seem to work out better for some reason. There's, a couple different ideas about why this happens, but it just does. So having an 8-note scale is kind of cool. So put in those passing tones. And of course, if you put them in too many places, it just turns into the chromatic scale, as you saw right here. Right? If I then went to the 6th and put, you'd have all of that. Right? Between the 5th and the 6th, you've got one. Between the 7th and the root, you've got one. And and if you get down to the chromatic scale, it kind of sounds like you're just faking it. But these are very effective notes to use. Let's use between the 5th and the 6th a little bit. All right, now here comes B flat. There it is. And of course, a little bit of blues scale always helps. So I think that's all I'm going to do on the mixolydian for this particular song. Now, I had another question from a piano teacher. And this came to me actually through Facebook. I belong to this group called The Art of Piano Pedagogy. So it's a really fun group to be a member of, because like if you have a question, especially about something like classical music, like, when do you play this grace note, or, what's a good fingering for this, you can just take a little picture of the music and stick it up there and ask the question. And within about 30 minutes, you've probably got, 50 to 100 responses. There's a lot of people in that group, and they all like to get on there and give advice. But anyway, this teacher was wanting to know about, they have a student that's like in a high school or junior high school jazz band, and they're doing something in B flat, a bluesy type tune. And, I've had a lot of students that have brought their jazz band music in, high school students and junior high students. And a B flat blues for the piano player is usually something like this. That's the B flat chord. Here's the E flat chord. All right. And her question was about improvisation. I don't know if it was using the mixolydian mode or not, but when you think about a typical blues progression, almost, if not all the chords, most of the chords are dominant 7th chords. So you can certainly use the mixolydian mode to improvise. So in B flat, let's use mixolydian mode. right, so there's a pretty lame chorus of the blues there. Now, I thought about this morning before. This is actually the third time I've done this video because I can't get my camera to focus correctly. But aside from that, I was trying to think about ways to think about this. And suppose you're using the mixolydian mode here on B flat. All right, you just flat the 7th. And then you use the mixolydian mode on E flat. But if you're soloing in one of these, high school jazz bands where there's, horns and people playing backups and all that stuff, you really don't have to use your left hand to solo. You could just solo with your right hand. And suppose you just want to think in the key of B flat. Well, B flat mixolydian is this. And E flat mixolydian, and I'm going to start on the B flat here, would be that. Okay, so here it is. Here's the scale. But if I started on B flat, it's actually B flat Dorian. It's the notes of the A flat major scale, right? So the E flat mixolydian would be the notes of the A flat major scale. So it doesn't matter where you start. So it'd be B flat Dorian. And then on the F chord, if you play F mixolydian but start on B flat, it's just the major scale of B flat, right? Right? F mixolydian is the notes of the B flat major scale, 2 flats. So you could just stay thinking in B flat. Now you have to think about the chords going by, what chord you're on. But first you do mixolydian, and then on the E flat chord you do Dorian, B flat Dorian, and then back to B flat mixolydian. And there's the B flat Dorian again. And here's Lydian, not Lydian, mixolydian on F, but in B flat, it's just the major scale. All right, now I gotta say, I've never really thought through the blues in that method, and I don't know anybody else who has done that. It's just one possibility of the way you could think about it. A better way, of course, is to just think the mixolydian scale for each chord that you're on, right? If you're on B flat, think B flat mixolydian, and put those passing tones in. All right, now, an even easier way, of course, is think of the blues scale. Use a little part of the blues scale. And B-flat blues scale, I mean, it's not the easiest one on the piano. There's no obvious good fingering. I was looking around at this earlier today and thinking that 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of works going up. And it works coming down, too, if you just kind of jump to it. I do this 3-fingered fingering where I go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then put my thumb on a black key. All right, I use that sometimes, but it kind of depends on the melodic line that you're hearing in your head and what fingers happen to be there available at the time. So a lot of times you'll get onto different fingering than maybe you've practiced. And I want to answer another question while I'm at it, and that was a question from someone who wanted to know, when I'm improvising, do I hear all the notes that I'm going to play as I'm playing them? Do I hear them in my head? And, and he called me a seasoned jazz performer. I was seasoned at one day. I'm kind of spoiled now. But I think that, yes, if you're a very good jazz improviser, you do hear most of the notes that you're going to play as you're playing them or right before you play them. You hear the sound in your head and you can go for it and you can execute it. But when you're learning, that is not the case. And what you do, I think, is you have to understand what you're doing in terms of like what chord you're playing and what scale fits that chord. And then you want to experiment and try to create melodies with that scale. And I'll give you a little example here of how this happened to me. I was practicing the altered scale. Let's say I'm doing a 2-5-1 in F. All right, and I just used the altered scale there just as a scale. Right into F there. But, you know, I play a lot of Bach. I love Bach. Bach is my favorite composer. And it's amazing how Bach can take, you know, basic harmonic ideas, the harmonic ideas that were available to him back in the 1700s, and create so many wonderful melodies. And if you kind of, you know, try to come up with different, you know, don't just play around up and down the scale all the time. You have to do that to kind of learn the notes, but, you know, try to create different little patterns and things. Like a lot of times jazz musicians will do these kind of patterns. You know, little staircase patterns, or they'll do 3 notes at a time. I don't know if I can do this on an altered scale. Something like that. But I came up with this idea. See, I skipped over that E flat there. I went da, da, da. And I said, well, that is a cool little idea there. Because you kind of skip over a note, and then you jump down and hit that note that you skipped over, and it just sounds cool. And the first time I played it, I certainly didn't hear it in advance. But after I said, oh, I like the way that sounded, then I practiced those kind of ideas, you know, in a few different keys. Well, I guess I didn't practice it in that key. But, you know, that's an idea that came from just knowing the scale and trying out things and saying, oh, that sounds good. And I guess as you practice your ideas over and over again, you get to where you hear most of what you're going to play more or less as you're playing it or slightly in advance. But there are times, and I always strive for this in my solo, to just not play the same old crap that I'm always playing, but to, you know, use what I know to go outside of what I'm really comfortable with and see what happens. And, you know, for instance, if you're trying to play outside a little bit, suppose you've got like a B-flat chord here, you know, you're playing some B-flat blues and you're going to use the pentatonic scale, like a B-flat pentatonic or something, and you want to play outside a little bit, so well, let's use the A-flat pentatonic scale. This will be easier. All right, that's an A-flat pentatonic scale, and I'm using that over a B-flat chord. That is a B-flat chord, and I want to go outside a little bit, so I'm going to go down the A-flat pentatonic, and then I'm going to switch to A pentatonic for a few notes, and then back to the other pentatonic, the A-flat or whatever. And let me give you an idea here. I'll do this. Now, I did not hear that before I played it. My fingers went to notes that they know are in the A-flat pentatonic scale, and I just played them. I couldn't really hear that in advance. Now, if I sat here and practiced all day on that kind of thing, I'd start hearing that too. But I don't think it's necessary, especially as a beginner, to be able to hear everything before you play it. You learn to do that, but use the knowledge that I and many other YouTubers are sharing with you to experiment and find things that sound good. Listen to the people that you want to sound like and try to figure out what they're doing. But just listening to it will help you when you're messing around with your own ideas to, you know, say, oh, that's something I like. Let me work on that. So anyway, I think that's going to be a wrap for today. Thank you all so much. I will see you again very soon.